Good evening, folks. Thanks so much for joining us. I see our little numbers are ticking up, so we will give it just a second so that everyone can get in and get settled. I am super excited to be here this evening. I'm Aurora Rey, your hostess. I don't know if I have the mostest, but I am your hostess this evening, and I am thrilled to be in the company of such a fantastic slate of authors who are going to talk about the joys and perils of writing series. And so I'm going to start actually by reading bios of everyone, since we're going to have hopefully as free-flowing a conversation as one can have on Zoom. So I just want everyone to know who we are talking with. So pardon me as I avert my gaze to my other screen. First up, we have Suzanne Lenoir, who is originally from the East Coast and is currently a resident of Cincinnati, Ohio. Her Valmoran fantasy novel, her Valmoran fantasy series novels, A Talent Within and A Talent Ignited, combine her love of YA fantasy with her interest in medieval history. Suzanne is a technophile, video gamer, history buff, and avid reader who loves EDM and builds model siege engines. She lives with her adventurous, spreadsheet-loving wife and her blind, toothless chihuahua. Sounds like a good life. Next up, we have J.M. Redmann, who has published 11 novels featuring New Orleans PI Mickey Knight. Her first book was published in 1990, one of the early hard-boiled woman and the lesbian detectives. Her books have won 3 Lambda Literary Awards, and The Intersection of Law and Desire was an editor's choice of the San Francisco Chronicle and a recommended book of NPR's Fresh Air. She is the co-editor with Greg Herron of 3 anthologies, one of which, Night Shadows, Queer Horror, was shortlisted for the Shirley Jackson Award. We are also joined by Karis Walsh, who is a medical office manager in the Pacific Northwest. She lives in a barn full of horses that she feeds at breakfast and tucks into their stalls at night. When she isn't working, writing, or hauling carts stuffed with hay, she likes to read and spend time with her animals. Jane Walsh is a Canadian author who once upon a time studied both history and costume design. She now puts those skills to good use by writing queer Regency romance novels, which I really wish had existed when I was a teenager. And last but not least, we have Kimberly Cooper Griffin, who is a Denver-based award-winning author of lesbian romance novels featuring women trying to nurture love when life tends to get in the way. Kimberly's work often features her love of the outdoors, Denver, and demonstrates how strong and resilient women are when they are faced with difficult challenges. Regardless of the situation, her characters always work through it with humor and grace and always get there happily ever after. HEAs for the win. This is a total powerhouse of panelists, and I am so excited. I'm going to kick it off with probably a little bit of a gimme, but I bet all our answers are going to be different, which is, like, what do you love about writing series in particular? And let's see, I'm gonna call on folks just to make the Zoom transitions a little bit easier. Jane, I'm actually gonna start with you because you happen to be top right on my screen.
Oh, the oldest.
Okay. I guess I love writing series because I love to read them. So I want to have written them. But the actual writing of them is challenging. But I love to write them because I love to read them. And there's a couple of different things that I think are great about series writing. So the series that I have is The Spinsters of Inverleigh, which is a Regency series. It's based around 4 friends in a seasort resort town in southern England that I totally made up. And what I like about writing the series was the familiarity of the setting, which is constant through all 3 books. So I knew where things were, I knew who secondary characters were, and there was a real ease. Like, I wasn't starting book 2 and 3 cold. I was starting them with some kind of familiarity. And I loved that feeling of almost like coming home, like when you're writing a book. Because usually when you write a new book, like, it's really like the possibilities are endless. And with writing a series, I felt like it really grounded me in the setting, which I really enjoyed. And the other thing that I think is fascinating about series writing in particular is the opportunity to explore themes or different experiences through different characters' eyes in different books. So you might have something happen in book 1 that, you know, the characters in the first book interpret a certain way, But in book 2 or 3, you have the secondary characters who become main characters, and you get their interpretation of events, which is very different. And I think there's a lot of room to kind of play around there, which I think is really fascinating.
Yeah, I love that. I love that answer. The world building is so fun, but to build a world and get to live in it for more than however long it takes to write one book is great. Suzanne, what about you?
So the 2 books that I wrote are the first 2 books I've ever written. They just happen to both be in the same place, so it's a series. So for me, it sort of, I fell into the series. The first book was written as a standalone, and then I realized at the end that I could make it more. And because I had spent literally 5 years creating the world, writing a second book felt very, very smart.
I love that. You're like, I'm going to milk this for all it's worth. It's totally legit. Karis, I'm going to come to you next.
I think my favorite part is that I can bring characters back again. Sorry, she's been quiet the whole time till I unmuted.
Always.
Once you're done with the book and you let those characters go, it's just, I miss them and it's hard. So when I do this series, I can bring them back. My 2 are the Mounted Police and the University Police series. And they're more companion novels, I would say, because they focus on different main characters. But it's groups of friends or co-workers. And so the ones from the previous books come back. And I've done that in a couple of my standalones too, where I've had characters, that characters that come back again, and you get to see them when they're not in the stress of their main story, but now they're just themselves. And that's one of my favorite things in writing, is to revisit those characters and just not have to let them go. So in a series, I can just keep talking about them and having them interact, and I like that.
Yeah, I love that. They do get to be this, we all behave differently when we're the center of attention versus not, even if it's on the page.
Yeah.
Kim, what about you?
Everything that they've said so far is they're very enticing for that. I think the main thing that I like about it is the community building. When I write individual books, most of my books are individual books, and even the things in my series are standalone books if you want to read them by themselves. But it's that sense of community. My side characters tend to take on a world of their own or lives of their own when I'm writing any of my books. And so it's really kind of cool to be able to explore that, because you have to kind of back away from that when you're doing a standalone, because they're just side characters. But being able to put some stuff in there and then to go back and explore that kind of thing is really really enticing to me as far as series go. But like Jane said about that whole being able to see things from different perspectives, that's really cool. Being able to see what different characters, how they react to different situations or the same situations, to be able to explore a lot more of that, and to show people that there's a lot more than this one aspect of something. So I think those are my favorite things about it. The other stuff is also cool, being able to have your world already built and that kind of thing. So that helps.
Yeah, for sure. And Jean.
Well, I write a mystery series, and so I'm actually following the same character. She's always going to be the main character, and I do write it in first person narrative. And I think there's a big, rich tradition of mysteries starting out, doing series. I mean, if you go back to Sherlock Holmes, he did multiple different things. So it was sort of the standard for it is you create the character who's searching for justice. In this case, it's a lesbian PI in New Orleans for me. And then it's like, what does she do next? And what does she do next? And what's the next case? And yeah, it allows for that building. It allows for a world that you created and you can build onto. It also allows, I think, for characters to grow, because we see my character. I mean, obviously, I've been writing for a while. The first book came out in 1990, so I've seen her go from being about the age I was back then. Fortunately for her, she doesn't age quite as quickly and relentlessly as I do. But you know, she's changed and grown over the years. She's about 20 years older now than she was when I started. And that's always an interesting thing is what's the new story? How do you take this place that's both familiar but make it new?
I love that. And I think you really hit on there are really different styles of series, right? Like, so you've got the type of series where you have a serial character who sort of makes their way through the world and sort of encounters different adventures or challenges or murders, if you will,
Yeah.
or other mysteries or crimes, versus kind of standalone stories that exist in the same world with some shared sets of characters. And so I'm going to ask each of you, what direction do you tend to go? Or I suppose the third is a series where it's a single story that's unfolding, and that you really can't read the books sort of on their own without profoundly sort of missing what's happening. So what tends to be your sweet spot, and would you veer out of that sweet spot and try a different style of series? And I'm just going to go in reverse order this time. So Gina, I'm going to start with you.
Oh, well, as I mentioned, I write a the PI series. You know, it's built on a lot of things that have been done before in the mystery world. You know, Raymond Chandler, Sarah Sue Grafton, all those. And it was like, okay, I want to create this character. She's a little rough around the edges at times, and find her voice. And I think the real advantage to first person is you do get very intimate with the characters. You are in that person's head. The disadvantage is you're in their head, and if you want them, you know, to know things that they don't have a way of knowing, or them to not know things that the reader knows, it becomes a bit more challenging. So I've kind of followed in that tradition. It's the same person. You're always going to be in my main character, Mickey Knight's head. You know, you're hearing her version of the story. And so again, sometimes that's a challenge, and sometimes it's also it does allow that really intimacy and developing the strong voice of the character.
That's really cool. Kim?
Well, you know, this is my sweet spot. This is actually called Sweet Spot. It's part of my series. I don't know if you can see it very well in the blurred background thing, but that's that when you said sweet spot, I'm like, yeah, cool. That's the sweet spot on a wave when you're a surfer. But I was worried about not being able to create a believable series, because mine are not following the same, it isn't following the same character, but the same characters do make appearances in the books. So I had to figure out how I was going to create something that made everything connect within the series. So the individual stories of the main characters and how they find each other, because I write contemporary romance typically, I had to find something that connected people beyond just that romance, right? And that's fine. I mean, that could just be a standalone book within a same community, but I wanted to put some stuff that there was a continuity to this story. So in the background of the series that I wrote, it's called an Oceana series romance. Oceana is a community in a place where I actually grew up in Oceanside, California, and it's in Oceanside, California. So it's on the beach, and it's kind of a Shangri-La, to borrow a term from one of the reviewers of my series, that this place has a little bit of a magical aspect to it. And that magical aspect is that people who move there have to have certain attributes, and they're actually picked by the people who own it by those attributes to make the community stronger. So there's this magical thing that they can see their essence. And then within the community, everybody's there to help somebody else within the community. So if you might not even know that you need something, but the community will deliver it to you at the end. So it's a little bit of a magical aspect behind it, but most of the series is in a realistic thing. And then there's other things like one of the characters suffers an illness in the beginning, and you kind of watch that person heal through that. And then another character is a surfer who's going through a tournament for surfing, to get the World Series of surfing, and you get to watch their journey until the end, and whether or not they make the cut, whether or not they get out there and they do what they want to do. So there's a few things with continuity. So that's where I went with my series, as opposed to having a specific person who's solving crimes or something like that.
So consistency of person, consistency of place. Karis, what's your...
Well, my first one, Mounting Danger, I was interested in the mounted police and their training. And so I kind of gathered together a mounted police training or a unit. And then it just seemed like that there was too much to just do one story, because there were other characters, there were other mysteries that could come up. So that's how that one started. And then the university police one was because I wanted to set something in a college and kind of the murder mystery academia type of aspect. So I wanted to do that. So mine have been focused on a police department and then members of the community being involved as well. So like I said, they're companion novels. So they're different main characters and different mysteries, but everyone else is still taking part and coming and showing up again. And they're all still kind of part of this larger community that they form with each other. And so there's a lot of working together, even though they are separate main characters. And I think that I would be open to trying different. I don't know that this is necessarily, it's just kind of how these two fell into being. And it just seemed to open up a lot of possibilities for different romances and different mysteries at the same time. So that's why I like that, but I would be open to trying like a series with an arc over 3 books or something like that, or a main character, like Jean was saying, one character who, keeps going on and kind of grows and develops. So yeah, the possibilities, I mean, there's just so, like you said, there are so many different options that be interesting to explore some different ones.
Yeah, it's interesting. And it's interesting to see how you tend to see one or the other if they're mysteries versus if they're romances, right? Like romances, you have to give them a satisfying kind of arc there. I just want to interrupt myself because I neglected to do some housekeeping when we first started. And just remind all of our participants that the chat is live. So if you want to comment or chat amongst yourselves, or share things with our authors and panelists, please feel free to do so. If you have a question that you would like to ask, please use the Q&A box so I don't miss it by accident. I see a few good ones coming in. So please feel free to participate. All right, Suzanne, I'm coming to you.
I'm here.
You
Here for
series.
it. I'm ready.
I don't know if you meant
Yes.
a series.
So mine is a fantasy series. And so now it has morphed into a classic trilogy, where my 2 teenage protagonists really are growing throughout those. That arc is both them and the world around them. So my world is the same. I've built the governmental systems, I've built the monetary systems, the religion, so I spent a lot of time building the world. So staying in it for a couple of books, makes sense in my situation because it is fantasy. There's so much went into it. But I made sure that in my case, there was a satisfying ending in both book and book 2. So you can pick it up, read it, and feel like, okay, I don't have to read book 2, but I certainly want to. That's my hope, is that you want to.
I'm so sorry.
It's okay.
My phone seems to be ringing and I'm going to have a disclosure moment. This is my mom who FaceTimes me, and if she doesn't get me, she tries 1,000 times. So I need to figure out how to turn off FaceTime on my computer, or mute it.
Or alternately, we get a live phone call with Mama Ray.
Yeah,
I will
invite her in. Just turn it on and say, hey, Mom, I'm a little busy right now.
Yeah, Okay, I'm gonna be super obnoxious, y'all. Jane, would you like to talk about your series? And I'm gonna go answer my mom on my
Absolutely.
phone and tell her to please stop calling. Welcome to Zoom Life. All right, Jane, I'm handing it over to you.
Absolutely. So my series, my current series, The Spinsters of Inverleigh, is linked by a setting, which is Inverleigh, the place, and also by friendships. So it's a 3-book series. There are 4 friends, and it follows, each one follows like a different friend in a different book, and they can totally be read as standalones, which I really like having a series that's defined by like either a friendship dynamic or families, like if they're all siblings or cousins or whatever. I think you really get a rich look at the entire community. Like as Kim was saying about like the community building, you get like that richness where you have all the different kind of people like in a very specific setting. Like it's really lovely, like as an author, but also as a reader, I love to read those kind of dynamics. And that's probably what I would continue to gravitate towards, which are standalone books like in a series linked by people or settings. But I would really like to do a longer series where you have the same characters, each one with a standalone, but sometimes you get a series where the author will develop a particular scenario in the background of all the books until like the very last book is like the really satisfying conclusion. It's like the oldest brother, or it's like the most determined friend who hates love, or, and you really need a lot of extra work. So that character needs a longer arc where they grow and develop across like maybe 7 books instead of just their own individual book. And I love that kind of thing. And I hope to one day write my own kind of epic through line like that.
Fantastic answer, and I'm sorry I missed a little bit of it. Apologies again, both to the panelists and our audience. I thought I had muted everything that needed muting, but I don't know how to fix that on my computer. So sorry. I'm so distracted now. Apologies. So this actually leads into a really great question from our audience. We have 2 very similar questions, which is like, how do you keep track of all of the details? Because there are a lot, both in terms of world building, character details, plot points. How much do you decide ahead of time, and then how do you keep track along the way? And Karis, I'm actually going to start with you this time.
Before I write, I tend to take a lot of notes and do a lot of outlining. I'm very much a planner when it comes to that. So I'll have arcs of the romance, arcs of the mystery, and then arcs of just kind of more general what's going on in the community and the friends. But since we do wrap up the mystery at the end, I don't have to, it's easier not to have to bring those details into the second book and worry that, now what did I say? What was that clue? So that does make it a little easier with the way I write. I've written the series. But yeah, I definitely have a ton of notes and notebooks and outlines, and I spend more time on that part than on the writing part. Definitely a planner. So I think just writing down every detail, going back through and getting the key points out that you can keep, highlight. I have different pages for different types of things, like, you know, physical characteristics and things in the notebook. So you really do have to keep track of the details. And then you get to the second book, and what color were her eyes or something, you know, things that you talked about. So yeah, I think, you know, getting a book, like they say, a series Bible, where you have all the details that you just keep writing down as you do them. I think that's really important with this, when you're going to have books that you might be writing after you've written I'll do a standalone or 2 in between and then come back to the series. So I'm not just writing that. And by that point, I'm, you know, maybe a year later. So yeah, definitely just notes on every single thing that you can.
Okay, that makes me curious about, not to get too deep into the weeds, but being a nerd, I'm curious, like, where do you do it? Word, Excel, a notebook? Like, what is your little detail?
Like those little spiral or the spiral notebooks for school that you get for $0.25. Those are my favorite. They're easy to write in. They're cheap. Yeah, and you can rip pages out and not care. So yeah, definitely I'm a spiral notebook person.
We could have a whole panel probably on what our like pen paper technology of choices, but I digress. Okay, Suzanne, this is you've obviously world building for fantasy is sort of tantamount, whether you're doing a series or not. So how do you keep track of all of your details and decisions?
I use OneNote, and I literally made pages of everything. So I have tabs for anything that I wanted to keep track of. My world has a very 12th, 13th century European feel to it. So I've literally researched as much as I could, down to what you would have in your pottage, to, like I said, I created a monetary system. I had to write that down, and I had to name it. Then I have names. I mean, in a contemporary novel, at least I can think of, oh, there was Julie down the street. I really like her name. Okay, in my case, the names can't be that common. So I literally made up names, and I have pages and pages of names that I strike through when I use them so that I don't reuse them. And it's funny because I have names for feast days and things. I mean, literally everything had to be made up. And at one point I just put XYZ in my document, and it went to Barbara Ann Wright, my editor. And in the comments, I got a little comment, and it said, "Oh, I love that feast." And I was like, XYZ. So keeping all of that in these tabs, just makes it that much easier, because there's no way I could remember everything that I put in 335 pages or whatever it turned out to be, the first one. And so then the second one went much quicker because I had all of that information in these tabs. And I'm not the most organized person, so doing this was really a good exercise for me as well.
Labor of love. It'll be interesting to see when this trilogy's done if you like, I'm just going to write something contemporary so I don't ever have to make it up again. But I love the XYZ. I was on a panel once with, I think it was Nathan Burgoyne, who talks about the brackets. Like when you can't decide something, just put a word descriptor in brackets, because you're never going to use brackets in your manuscript. So you can just do a search at the end and find everything you hadn't made up yet. And I definitely use that a lot, because I'm like writing and then I take like half an hour to go like pick one name. It's not useful. Let's see, Jane, I have not asked you this question yet, and I'm curious.
Well, first of all, I also do the X. I do XX in my manuscript when I don't, a lot of like place names and character names, like it's like the Duke of XX or the Count of XX. And just things that I know like I'm gonna have to come back to later, but they're really secondary minor details. So then at the end I do a search for the XX and they'll come up, which is tedious because of how often I'll put in something where I'm like, oh yeah, somebody needs a name. Very, very aggravating. But as to the actual question at hand, I had a really good idea of the setting for my series before I started it. I knew it was going to be 3 books, and I knew that the setting of Inverley, like it was really clear in my head where it was. I kind of drew like a very loose map, like not a very detailed one, but I needed to know the shape of the town and how walkable it was, because these characters back in Regency England, they walked everywhere pretty much. Like it's a small town, so it's not like they were going by carriage like to people's houses. Like they were all, within like such and such distances, and it was important for me to map out those things, like physically, like how far is it from the tailor's shop to the seaside, and from like one part of town to the other where I knew they lived, because it was going to be an important consideration. Like you couldn't run there in 2 minutes or something. And I did have a spreadsheet. Like I use Excel for these kind of details where I put that stuff in there. So in terms of setting, I had it kind of mapped out and clear, and I had notes. In terms of the characters, they really developed with the first book. Like I kind of let the characters evolve during the writing of that. So all of my notes that I took were kind of not useful when I got to book 2 and book 3. I had to really go back to see what I'd actually put in the manuscript for book 1, because I go through a lot of edits when I'm writing, and I change a lot of details. And I'll change things like eye color or height or whatever, like while I'm going, and I might do different passes where I'm like, like I think I'm going to tweak this a little bit. So I always feel very nervous relying on my notes because I worry that I haven't updated them after the book goes to print. And like, what if I take the wrong eye color from my Bible when actually the book? So I always double check what's been published. Like I do a search in the PDF that we get for the proofing. And that's how I make sure that like my details like eye color, hair color are all consistent.
You're really getting the peek behind the curtain today, folks. Kim, series, how do you keep track of all the things?
Well, for the Writing Academy at GCLS, I teach. I'm not a pantser. I used to be a pantser, and sometimes I still act like a pantser in certain parts of my book. But I teach a whole series on developing your outline and that kind of thing. So I actually practice what I preach on that, and so I create an outline for everything, and the outline matches the beats of romances because I do romance, but it also matches the character arcs of each one of the characters. So each character that goes into it is where it kind of, oh, thank you, Anne. That's so nice. But within the arc, I have to follow that. So I need to know what the transition or the transformation is going to be with that character, and who's helping them through that transition, and what things inside the story are doing that. And I could go on and on. So if anybody ever wants to geek out on outlines and character arcs, let me know. But when it comes down to technical, I'm all online. If I were to write things, I can't even read my own writing half the time. And I'm so anxious about getting things into my story that I will not transcribe things. I will rewrite it. So I just write it into my story and try to move things around a bit. I use my notes application in my computer with style sheet kind of things on each character and stuff like that. And I also use Word to carry my outline and all that. I've tried to use Scrivener, and it's just my version of ADHD makes it so that I want to use everything perfectly, and it just takes too much time for me. So I don't want to do that. So I just do it in Word. Not terribly detailed, and I'm not that organized. I sound organized, but I'm not that organized.
Jean, what about you, especially with having one character who spans your series? What details do you think are really important to keep track of over time?
Well, I guess I'm the weird person here because it's in my head. I mean, it really is. I write books from my head. I wrote an outline for my first book and I paid no attention to it. So by the time I'd finished the book, I realized, well, outlines don't really work for me. And I started off the first book, I thought it would be a short story, and then I found out I'm not really a short story writer. I actually write novels. And I know these characters. It's just, and I think people have different the way we see things in our mind's eye, and I just know exactly what they look like. So if I want to know what their eye color is, I just think, okay, what does Mickey Knight look like? And I just pull up what I envision her as, and then I can tell what her eye color is. So I'm very, very loose on the notes. I will jot down a few things here and there. Sometimes when I'm writing the manuscript, I put a note right at the end so I can check it out. Then of course, in the editing process is when I figure out, okay, did I keep it consistent? Did I do this? I don't have a Bible. I probably should. And there are probably some things that people will catch me on if they read everything, all 11 books in order over, like 2 days. They're going to go, oh, well, this didn't match, book 1 and book 10 were like, and I'm like, well, time passed. I forgot. All right. I didn't note it down. But, I have the book in my head. And it's the writing is the art of just pulling those visions I'm seeing. And I think one of the things with a first person is, for me, I just trying to get into, okay, my character is a private detective. How is she going to solve this? What would she do next? What are the next steps? Who's she going to talk to? What's going to happen? And that's how I do it. I just, and I may be the incredibly weird person, and it seems to work for me. And I'm not advising anyone else to do it unless you're an incredibly weird person, exactly like me, and you're not, to try and do this. But, it really is, you do have to figure out your system that works, because you do have to maintain those characters.
Well, it obviously works for you, given your very prolific career thus far. So I think it's nice. And I think it's a great example to see how differently everyone does it. And to know that there's not a single right way to do it. You just have to find a way to keep track. Otherwise, you'll drive your editor crazy. Jean, I have a sort of a piggyback question for you. Because you write your Mickey Knight character kind of book to book to book, one of our audience members is curious about kind of how you decide what issues to resolve, and how you pace your character's growth. Specifically that rarely does a book fully satisfy all the issues, questions, or relationships. And are you tempted to tie things up with a neat little bow sometimes? And how do you manage that side of things?
Well, if you read my books, you know that I don't always tie things up with a neat little bow in there. Fairly, it's a walk the mean streets kind of private eye, and some issues are challenging and hard. A lot of them are the ones that I've had to, crashed into in my life. Transitory, my most recent one, deals with the murder of African American transgender woman, and I'm retired now, but I worked for many years in public health and doing HIV/AIDS prevention. And I worked closely with, the LGBTQ community, including we had many transgender people on staff. We actually did research studies into the transgender community in New Orleans to figure out how to do HIV prevention. So I felt like, I know these people, and I need to write a book that, first of all, states very clearly where I come down on the transgender issue, is that everyone's people are people, and people get to decide who they are and how they define themselves. But also, it's coming up with what do I think my character needs to do at the moment. A lot of the times I've twined both what's going on in her life with what's going on in the mystery, because that's how we think about things, the stories. What is the story we want to tell? Because, our characters are living their lives, and we don't talk about doing the laundry. Don't talk about, oh my God, the time you went to Taco Bell because you were really hungry and, you ended up standing in the bathroom. We don't talk about those things because they're not interesting to the story. So it's what is the particular story in my character's life that I want to tell right now. And again, sometimes it's just what comes into the world around me that I think really interests me and I think would interest my character. Obviously, being in New Orleans, I had to deal with Katrina, and what happened in Katrina and how did that affect every single one of my characters, because they were all affected. So it sometimes it depends on that. It's something I want to write about, or something that comes into my life and I feel I have to write about.
That's such a great answer, and I think speaks to kind of the way you want certain stories and characters to feel like life, especially when you're doing something that really unfolds over so much time. For everyone else, I'm going to ask a slight variation of that, which is, when you know that you're writing a series, do you know, especially if you're writing standalones that are sort of shared world, overlapping characters, do you know what every story is going to be when you start, or do you just kind of maybe know who the characters might be in the next book? And do you try to have some plot line, if not, say, the romance arc of a romance series, span all the books? How do you decide what to resolve and what not to resolve from book to book to book? Does anybody kind of have thoughts on that? It's a convoluted question, so I'll let you volunteer.
I'll go ahead and do that.
I was like, no.
I wanted to have a core, situation that would span the books to keep them connected. But I had a hard time thinking of what that was. And so when I had to pitch the series, I pitched an arc of 3 of the books, and I can pretty much go in and add more characters and add things. But for those 3 characters, I wanted to make sure that I planned it out enough so that it didn't feel like I was going, oh, and then another thing, You want it to kind of hint at something going along. And so I introduced characters, even though they weren't maybe 100% relevant to the storyline of the first book. They were brought in as people that would help develop the characters of the primary characters in the first book. So there was a little bit of, for me, it was trying to make sure that everybody had some kind of connection to those three stories in some way, so that it just didn't come up as a just like, oh, and then there's this other thing that goes on with it. And then, like I said earlier, making sure that there was a couple of events that I wanted to span that kept a kind of a consistency of what that community is, and it showed the community aspect of it. So I needed to make sure that, so it's a very much of character development exercise for me.
Yeah, that makes total sense. Anyone else have opinions on that? Jane, I see you unmuted yourself.
Yeah, I mean, I started my series with a very clear idea of the setting, and I had the 4 friends. But what I didn't have was the love interests of the friends of the other books. Like, I thought I did. I had notes about who they were going to fall in love with. And for both book 2 and book 3, I totally scrapped the original plan of who they were going to end up with. And I felt like I had the freedom to do that because the love interests that I had initially planned, they weren't present in book 1 anyway. So I did have the freedom to change what I wanted to, but I'm not a natural plotter, and I definitely need that room to like figure things out as I'm going. And I needed to give myself the room to be like, no, I think this person is going to be a better match for her. So that's what I'm going to do in book 2. And then in book 3, I still didn't have like a love interest for the heroine of book 3. So she got, whoever I thought would fit best for the story I wanted to tell. And I think there is room in series writing to give yourself the freedom to do what you might want, even though all of my books are like, they're very fully realized and they're wrapped up. Like, there's no kind of loose ends or cliffhangers or what happens next in the book. Like the book is done when you finish the book, and then the next book is its own kind of standalone within the series. But I would like to experiment more with that. I think it's really interesting when series have like a central theme that you can follow book to book. I really enjoy that as a reader. So it's something that I'd like to do, but it's not something that I have done.
So many moving parts, which I think, again, we sort of love and find super challenging. I think that's one of the reasons readers love it so much, that they're just layers that you don't always get in sort of single standalone books. I do want to make sure that I take a moment to have each of you promo your latest release, and maybe also a couple sentences about what you're working on now. So let's do a round robin. Jean, I'm going to come to you first.
Okay. Well, I am actually working on the next Mickey Knight book, which is tentatively titled Mickey Knight book number 12. That probably will change. Interestingly enough, I'm also working on another novel, which may or may not be part of a series. It features, the main character is a drag queen in New Orleans. I worked with somebody who, actually we worked together for over 7 years, and then he decided he wanted to leave public health and become a drag queen. So he's kind of helping me with it. So it's sort of interesting because one world is brand new, and other than the fact I'm setting it in the same city, but the other world, of course, the Mickey Knight world, is one I'm very familiar with. And so it really brings out the contrast to me, what work we have to do when we create the worlds that we do for our characters. It's not as easy as it looks. In other words, don't try this at home. We're experts. Let us do it.
But you should also all try it at home because it's fun. Yeah. You don't have to do anything with it. Kim.
My series, the Oceana romance series, I just finished the 3rd book in it, and that was all I pitched to Sandy. But as I was writing it, there were other things that came to mind while I did that. So I have these other stories that are percolating in the background that I could add to it, but I'm not sure I'm going to. They're just fun that for me, but that's coming out. Lost Harbor is coming out in February, that's my the end of that 3-book series, unless I pitch more to Sandy, and she's so nice to say okay. But I did just sign a contract on another book just recently. It's called Accidentally in Love, which will come out later in the year, and that one actually is in the same world as the Oceania people, so that it shares a coffee shop, it shares a few things in the area that kind of tie things together, so people would know that they're the same thing, but it's not part of the series, it's just in the same world.
Nice. Karis, what do you have out and what are you working on?
My most recent one is the second University Police book. It's A Degree to Die For. And the first book was With a Minor in Murder. And I'm working on the third one and a standalone contemporary romance at the same time. So I've kind of got myself split a little between the two. I need to just pick one of them and finish. But yeah. So there will be a third one in the University Police, hopefully, and then on to some standalones for a while.
Nice. Good times. I work in academia and I can't decide if I should or shouldn't dive into that series. Suzanne, so you mentioned is the first book out or the first 2 books out and you're working on the third?
Talent Within was the first book. It came out last June, and then Talent Ignited is book 2. It just came out in November.
Excellent.
And so go out and buy them both so that we get to the third book. How about that?
Nice. That's a
But
great pitch if I ever heard
I have
one.
lots of other things that I'm ready now. This was my debut last year, so I'm ready to write some other things, not just this. So I'm not going to sit on my laurels, I promise.
That is good to hear. Lots of good stuff coming out. And Jane, what about you?
My series, The Spinsters of Inverleigh, is complete as of this month, so you can get all 3 books now. The first one, The Inconvenient Heiress, is Friends to Lovers, Girls Next Door. The second book, The Accidental Bride, which came out in 2023, this is the one that you can get the 20% discount on this year. This is Opposites Attract, and there's a race to Gretna Green. If you're into like Regency tropes, that's something to look out for. And my most recent book came out this month, The Secret Duchess, which is about a fashionable spinster and a widowed duchess as they find love in Inverleigh. So that's complete now. You can check those out. And as for what I'm working on next, I'm definitely experiencing series fatigue, where I'm done with the series, I'm done with that setting, I want to move on. So I'm doing another Regency romance, but this time set in London. It's called Seducing the Widow, and it'll be out sometime next year.
Love that. Great moment to plug too. There is a 20% off flash sale happening throughout the bookathon. 20% off all titles published in 2023. So make sure you hit that up. And we do like to give a little bit of a cushion between panels. So I'm going to close with where can folks find you? Where's the best place for readers to reach out if they want to be in touch? Jane.
I have a website, janewalshwrites.com, and that's my handle on Twitter and Instagram as well.
Nice. Suzanne.
You can find me everywhere. I got an account on every social media known to man.
But which one do you use?
Okay, I like Instagram the best. You can find me there, Suzanne Lenoir .author on Instagram, and I use the X quite a bit, but it's all under Suzanne Lenoir author or some variation of that, and also SuzanneLenoir.com. So you can find me there. Thank you.
Awesome. Karis?
There we go. My website is kariswalsh.com, and then I'm on Facebook, not much on Instagram, but yeah.
Nice. Kimberly?
I am very active on, or more active on Instagram than any other platform, but I'm on Blue Sky, Threads, X. I can't quit X. There's too many good people still there, and I love to watch it, but hate the platform. And I'm at KimberlyCooperGriffin.com. My website's not quite up to date recently, but you can definitely get me on my email there. And I like to interact with people. So if you interact with me in my DMs or at me on anything, I usually will pick up. And I love talking to people, so do it.
You've got consent to add her, folks. So
Yes, at me.
And Jean, what about you? Where can folks find you?
Usually in this section with a really good scotch. I have a website, jmredmann.com, and I'm also on, I still am on the site formerly known as Twitter, but I don't really do much interaction there. Probably Threads is the best way to get me. I'm also on Blue Sky, and I actually do the old email stuff.
Fantastic. So I want to say a huge thank you to all of our panelists for answering all of my questions. Attendees, thank you for joining us, taking some time out of your day to keep us company and ask some really great questions. Again, I apologize for the kerfuffle with my FaceTime. I'm going to go figure out how to change my notification settings for all future panels. Lots of great events happening. Still some more to happen this evening. Lots tomorrow, Monday, and next weekend. So please join us if you can. Thank you again, and have a fantastic rest of your weekend.
Thank you, Aurora, for being a great moderator, and thank you all for being great panelists.
Thank you too.
Thanks, folks. Thank you.